like a butterfly flapping his wings deep down into the forest, man. It's gonna cause a tree fall like 5,000 miles away, man. There ain't nobody seeing nobody. Man, see, like, you don't even know, man. It's like you're born into this world, man. And you got like that, the dust and wind, man. Or like the dang old candle, man. It don't matter, man. It's all the time anyway.
All right, Brad Kelly, welcome to the Jay Burden Show. How you doing, man?
Great, man. Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm really excited to have you on. You and I have been, kind of swimming in similar waters for a while. We have a lot of friends in common, but, haven't actually sat down and recorded. And, more than just kind of catching up, we're here to talk about your book, The Earthen Dark. You sent me a review copy of it. I really liked it, really enjoyed it. And I read a lot for this program. I like to do a lot of book reviews, and there's a lot of books that I get sent that don't quite, make the cut. And this one, it was, very, very quickly, I was like, all right, this is going to be a winner. So yeah, man, obviously, you wrote a book, but other than that, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. Well, thanks for that. The process of, it's funny, you write these books more or less in isolation. Every once in a while, I get some input from somebody on part of it or whatever. And I had an editor help me that I pay. He's a friend of mine, but I find that if you actually pay people, find one good person and pay them, it actually works a lot better. So yeah, thank you for saying that. I hope other people will enjoy the book as well. Yeah, my name is Brad Kelly. I'm a novelist. Got 2 novels out there. The most recent one is The Earthen Dark, just came out a couple weeks ago. I also have a book that came out a few years ago called House of Sleep. Quite different, but I think equally as good, and people seem to enjoy that book. I also have my own podcast, mostly focused on literary matters, called Method Madness. Do focused episodes on a pretty decent range of books, in my opinion, plus conversational episodes with writers and other sort of internet personality type folks, and a few other little projects here and there. So, yeah, that's basically me. I'm from the Detroit area originally. I got my MFA from the University of Texas, which gets some booze in the literary, not the Texas part, the MFA part. Sometimes gets booze from from my corner of like indie writers. But that's definitely an important part of sort of my whole pathway to getting where I'm at right now, is in terms of what I'm able to put out as a writer and as a podcaster, even, I suppose. Yeah, that's, I guess, me in the tiny nutshell. Of course, I'm also, a human being, and I'm a father and a husband and have a day job and all of that.
We don't care about you. Yeah, right?
That's fair. Yeah.
No, in all seriousness, a couple things. One, you did an excellent episode with one of my buddies, Andrew Edward. I'll obviously link to all your stuff. I'll link to that one because I like Andy's stuff. He's a good writer. But it's interesting you bring up the Detroit connection, because I probably could have guessed that from this book. And right off the start, it's sort of one of my favorite recurring features in books, which is books that have a very strong sense of place. This is the whole reason that I actually like New Orleans, despite it being an absolutely horrible city, right? Yeah. By every objective standard. It's like, well, you read Confederacy of Dunces, All the King's Men and Walker Percy, and you're like, oh, I think I like Louisiana for no reason at all. And obviously I'm not trying to put Detroit and New Orleans in the same category. I would never impugn the honor of Detroit. But in all seriousness, you have a very strong sense of that in this book. And so if you could you describe that process of, transmuting this space, this location, into a piece of art?
Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't have a lot of love for the place anymore, to be honest. I have a lot of love for people that I know here, friends and family and that kind of stuff. But as a place, my wife and I are actually like in the sort of medium term plan is to not be anywhere near this city anymore. But, I was born, if people have seen, about 8 Mile, that Eminem movie or whatever, I was born on 23 Mile. So, that's basically a measure of distance from downtown Detroit. Definitely a suburban kid for sure. But I also went to Wayne State University, which is in Midtown Detroit, and lived down there in the early 2000s. And it's it's a place with kind of a crazy history. And when I was living there, especially in the 2000s, I mean, I don't spend hardly any time down there anymore except for work occasionally. But in the early 2000s, there was this very strange vibe in which, and I've felt this in some other places in the world that I've traveled to, where there was a sense that we were like living in the ruins of something. Like Detroit was once a great American city. I mean, it was New York, Chicago, a couple other, LA, Detroit were these great American cities. It was the I don't know what organ, but the heart maybe of the American industrial enterprise throughout much of the 20th century. And then it just fell apart. And so there is this way where you're living in sort of the dark mirror reflection of both like what America could be and like what in a positive and negative sense, what this place could be. Right. And the history so there's something somewhat intoxicating about that as a setting. And you know, when I graduated college the first time, I moved away, and I was gone for 11 or 12 years until I sort of circled my way back. And I still had a lot of friends and family here. And, you know, I don't know, a particularly interesting story. Sort of ran out of money and stuff elsewhere in the country. I was living in upstate New York, and I eventually came back here figuring I'd find somebody who would be willing to do me a favor, and that worked out. And ever since I came back, life has been amazing. Everything's been going in the direction you want it to. But I then got a job when I came back. I have an engineering degree. I got a job working for a geotechnical engineering firm focused mostly on sewers. So I ended up spending a lot of time in downtown Detroit and a lot of that time in the sewer systems, and a lot of that time digging holes. Not myself, I'm an engineer, so mostly we stand there with a clipboard and like wag our finger at people. But spending a lot of time like in the actual dirt and filth of the city, and sort of, I don't know, psychically picking up on something there. And then I started to get really more interested in the history of the place as well. And so a lot of that has been reading and talking to some people and digging into old archives and stuff like that. But in terms of turning it into like material here, there is a way that certain places in the city of Detroit feel, and I did do my best to try and convey that, because it's what I imagine a haunted house feels like, but at a city scale. Is kind of what the city of Detroit is for me. So.
Well, and it's almost interesting as well, because Detroit is sort of, it's emblematic of like American decline, right? Of the Rust Belt. Yep. And there's a famous series of photos. I can't remember what the artist was, but of kind of chronicling that. Like he did a photo shoot in the Cadillac Hotel. Mm-hmm. And there's it's of course, you know, this kind of beautiful building completely and totally decaying. And they're very poignant images, right? I realized that was no citations on that, but I'm sure you guys can find it on Google. It's not hard to find.
Yeah, I've seen them, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's I know what you mean. It sort of feels like, and you know, I don't pretend I haven't been to Detroit in 15 years, but when I went there, it sort of felt like a place that was emptying out. Mm-hmm. You know, where it felt like, we're sort of in the ruins of something, both on the level of, you know, you can see there was something here, now there is not, but also in the sense that it feels half full. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of, if you've ever read Gene Wolfe, right? Mm-hmm. He describes a very similar process where, you know, the population of Earth is collapsing. And so to get anywhere, you have to walk through, you know, miles and miles and miles of just abandoned buildings. Yeah. Similarly to sort of, you know, Dan Dort's Dream of Electric Sheep as well. And I thought that was really poignant. I didn't actually know that detail about you working in sewers, but you know, given the content of the book, I probably could have guessed.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Our main character, Jim, is a disgraced academic, right? He went through a cancellation. It's sort of malicious. And we find him in this sort of like well of self-pity. Obviously, you know, this is how he ends up, you know, working in sewers, right? Doing this kind of low-end blue-collar job. There's a really interesting scene where he goes to a dinner party with all of his old colleagues. I'm not going to say I enjoyed it. It's not a pleasant scene, but it's a really interesting one. So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are you trying to get across in that interaction?
Yeah, well, I've worked, I do the work that I've done in the sewers and at other places. I mean, I'm probably an odd person in terms of sort of career and where it's placed me in my life and in sort of time and place where, yeah, I've had an engineering degree for 20 some years now, and I've done engineering work here and there. And so that's put me in these sort of professional environments and meetings with people. And I've presented at, city board meetings and stuff like that. But I've also spent time in sewers. But, I've also, through the vicissitudes of career, when I first moved back to Michigan as a 30-something-year-old man, I had a job cleaning boats, scraping zebra mussels off of boats and cleaning out engine rooms of boats. And it was funny, at one point, a friend of mine that had gotten me this job, and he's gone on to do great things since then. He's an amazing guy. But we had this moment where we're cleaning out an engine room of this yacht, and we're making $12 an hour or $15 an hour. We're both in our 30s. And we both looked at each other. He's spent time teaching. He now teaches at a university, but we looked at each other and we said, man, we should have gone to college. We both cracked up because between the two of us, we had about 15 to 20 years of college with degrees. We both had multiple degrees at this point. It's just how things worked out. So I guess in that sort of scene, taking Jim from, this position within academia and sort of putting him in this like blue collar environment, part of the thing was him sort of realizing his own incapacity to make this shift or his struggle with making this shift, but then also realizing that like all of the sort of on the surface level sort of good intentions of academic types and maybe a lot of people who sort of play at sympathy or solidarity with like working class people and blue collar work and the stuff that actually builds the country. A lot of it is just fake. A lot of it is just sort of on the surface of it, but secretly they sort of denigrate it and think less of it and don't really respect the fact that, basically the bones of this country were mostly built by young men with a cigarette hanging off their lip who, the types of people that Jim's interacting in with this dinner scene, wouldn't invite them into their house. Those are the kinds of dudes who mostly built the country. And I think that gets kind of lost in sort of the computer toucher economy that we live in, that all of this stuff requires people to do jobs that kind of suck. I was literally out on a site today and it was 4 degrees out. And luckily, I get to do the engineering thing. I get to stand there and take a photo and get on the clipboard and take notes and ask people questions, whatever. But there's guys down in waders in the sewer, drilling holes through an old pipe, and groundwater's coming in on them, and all of this. And it's 4 degrees out. And that's the kind of stuff that makes our world run. It's a lot more important than most people's computer toucher jobs, actually. So I was trying to get to that on an emotional level, I guess. I don't know if that answers. Yeah,
it's an interesting scene for a couple reasons. One, the relationship between Jim and his wife and Jim and his daughter is very, very well done.
Thank you.
And as someone who has dragged my wife through a series of, shall we say, abrupt career changes. It's funny you bring that up. Like, I, graduated college with the sort of degree that people get for because a job is a sure thing, right? Mm-hmm. And was working in a garment factory, right? On like 10-hour shifts starting at 5 every morning. Yeah. And had a very similar realization. Like, what am I doing? What did I jump through all those hoops? And I think ultimately, it's easy to say looking back, it was a good thing for me. Yeah. But, in that scene, right, where we sort of see Jim getting halfway pitied, right? The idea that, he has been forced to stoop, right, to such a level is seen as, a very pitiable thing. And the reaction or the interaction between him and his wife, both before, during, and after, is really interesting. So If you could you just describe a little bit of that relationship between Jim and his wife?
Yeah. That's something she's not on the page very much at all. I mean, I think she really only shows up in, I don't know, 4 chapters or something like that.
Right.
But it was very important to me that it be a significant part, a significant aspect of his reality and like his motivations and all of that. There's, the one thing, so me trying to figure out who she was, the kind of genesis of starting to figure out who she was realizing that I absolutely hate the nagging wife character. I know there are nagging wives out there, but I hate that as a sterile, one-dimensional plot device. Like
stock character,
like Breaking Bad. To me, the thing I dislike the most about Breaking Bad is Walter White's wife, and not because she does a perfectly fine performance or whatever, but there gets to be a point if you're watching that show where she clearly is there as a plot foil to like provide friction for him, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not, she doesn't have her own like she loses her own reality. So I wanted to make sure that like she wasn't just a nagging wife who was like causing problems for him, that he was feeling what I think many men have probably felt in the situation where they're sort of not living up to whether it's providing or defending or whatever they feel like they should be trying to live up to, when they feel like they're not living up to that. And I wanted that to be the pressure, not that she was giving him a hard time about it, but he was giving himself a hard time about it because he wasn't living up to what he wanted to be for her. I think that's closer to the reality for people. I know for me, like my wife doesn't nag me at all, but there is a little voice in my head that doesn't want to disappoint her. And if I did disappoint her, she probably wouldn't even say anything, at least not for a while, but I want to be the best man that I can be for her. So I was trying to put Jim through that process and give him a wife who was like a real person, but also a good person, a person that, you would like to a certain degree. Yeah.
Well, and again, like, I think that's one of the things that really provided a lot of, emotional weight to this is that, look, as someone who is now a full-time internet person, right, for whatever that's worth, like there were and continue to be those nights where I'm sort of laying up staring at the ceiling where it's like, not only what did I do, but what did I do to her? Like I dragged her into this and now she's stuck, like I don't, you don't have the normal job, right? All those sort of things. And that's a minor shadow of what's, happening in this. And I will say, I thought that you handled the cancellation quite well, because in a lesser book, that would be the point of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And that would sort of become this like didactic moment. And you were quite delicate with that. So just kudos there. Thanks. But we haven't really gotten into the sort of, the thrust of this, right? What happens to Jim when he's down there with his, his coworkers. So briefly, and again, we're not trying to, provide a blow by blow. There's a lot more that we can't cover, but what does Jim discover in kind of the bowels of the city?
Yeah. There's I think on the front cover of the book, I describe it as a labyrinth of the mind. He and the crew, they're down there doing sewer rehabilitation work. So this is hands-on stuff, basically patching up a very old sewer. And this is something I've spent a lot of time watching, at least, and being right next to. So it's very familiar to me. And they basically uncover a sort of side tunnel that leads them into, I almost cringe at to use the word, but they basically leads them into a portal. And this, once they pass through this, the next sort of thing that happens to them is they're now in some other terrain within the sewer that seems to be partially defined by like their own mental state. And when they try to exit the sewer, they discover that, they're not in Kansas anymore, fundamentally. They climb up out of the sewer and it's similar to home, but it's not home. And that sort of kicks off the sort of, I guess, the A plot of the book of them trying to navigate this increasingly dangerous and and unpredictable and mysterious labyrinth that the sewer they were in has become. I don't know. I don't think that gives away anything that's not already given away on the back, on either the front or the back cover of the book. But it gets, it definitely goes into speculative terrain. We're in SF land by page, I don't know, 30 or something like that, I would say. Yeah. Oh, you're on mute there. Sorry.
A professional podcaster, ladies and gentlemen. You'd think I know how to use this software, considering I use it at least daily.
No, anyway. I get it. I'm always looking for some button I used yesterday. Yeah, no, I understand.
But point is, the interaction between the different sewer workers is quite. It's really interesting, right? You have kind of different characters, which if you have worked a low end job before, you have met these guys, right? You have. Which is honestly, like, I think one of the strengths of it is, like, when I'm reading through this, it's like, oh, that's not the captain, that's this guy I know, right? It feels very kind of true to life, which I enjoyed. And especially the kind of fish out of water nature of being like the college kid, of being like, the educated middle class person, for whatever those terms are worth, in a more hands on the ground setting. You capture that feeling well. But the first sort of portal they emerge into, if I'm not mistaken, is an almost one-to-one copy of the world that they left, except it is completely and totally depopulated. So of course
he's disappeared. Yeah.
They don't really understand, what's going on. So they all, leave. And, as they go back, obviously Jim goes back to his wife and kids, or his home, where he sees nothing, something that happens multiple times in the book with sort of different, in different versions, we see that same thing happen. But before they meet back up, Jim does a little borrowing, right?
Right.
And, this is one of really two things he carries with him through most of this book. Obviously not through all of it, but do you want to speak to kind of the not symbolic, that sounds chin stroking, the importance of this watch in the narrative?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. Yeah, so he goes and he steals this watch, and it's a very particular person's watch, which is significant both plot wise and sort of in Jim's psychology. And part of the reason he steals this watch is it's worth a lot of money. And I suppose if you're trying to stealing something that you can fit in your pocket that's worth a couple $100,000 is probably a pretty good option if you're going to steal something. But I mean, for me, in terms of it being an aspect of the plot, it's and sort of what's going on for Jim, it's, I see it as a sort of an attempt for him to sort of haltingly and fumblingly start to assert his agency, because as the book begins, he has very little, sort of by his own doing, by his own sort of lack of a spine, fundamentally. And so it's sort of the beginnings of him, the very, very dim early echoes of him beginning that process. But it's also, it also comes back, I don't want to give too much away, but it becomes a problem later on in a hopefully somewhat surprising way for people who are reading it. And what I was hoping to do with that is, partially what I'm trying to do with this book is create multiple layers of senses of claustrophobia, right? There's the actual physical claustrophobia of being in like an 8-foot sewer pipe. And that's, if anybody's ever been in one, that's got this own like claustrophobia to it. And I've seen people who can't be in there before. They just innately can't deal with it. So I wanted that, but I also wanted sort of fractal layers of claustrophobia, so that when you make just how that perhaps relates to my perspective on how sort of life and reality works is that every decision you make has a kind of combinatorial explosion of like what can result from you making those decisions. And so, perhaps on some level, I'm saying that because of that, because you can't ever predict what's going to be the outfall of your decisions, like your best bet is like try to do the right thing all the time, like literally just like tell the truth and don't hurt people and all of the sort of old verities. And and maybe even if you do that, things may still not work out, of course, but definitely violating them is opening yourself up to that sort of fractal layer of fractal layers of claustrophobia closing in on you even more.
There's a decent amount of House of Leaves in this, which, I just sort of sprang into my head, both, in that sense of, being in this sort of like maze of the mind, right? This kind of like non-Euclidean realm, but also because sort of one of the other things that, Jim carries, through this is a book that he both aspires to write and has already written. Right. He comes into possession to, this book, right, underneath and inside, written by Jim. And it's interesting because at the beginning, right, where he's sort of stumbling around, trying to figure out how to put his life back together, one of the things that he throws out at the party is like, oh, I'm working on a book, right? Which, may or may not be true to what degree, right? He's working on that book.
That's easy to say too, right? It's easy to just be like, yeah, I'm working on a book. Yeah.
100%. Right. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because it does sort of not quite the B plot, but at the beginning to, almost every chapter, you get an excerpt from his book, which is all about these underground spaces. So what are you trying to accomplish with those excerpts from his book? And then also, what is the, importance of this book? Somewhat later in the narrative, he has a physical copy, another thing he carries with him, at least through most of this journey. But it does stand out.
Yeah, initially there's that book, the book inside the book, underneath and inside, kind of it took on different characters through the development of this book. Initially, I was just doing a ton of research and reading and listening to stuff about various, trying to understand the sort of ecosystem of images and historical references and metaphors, and frankly, like even like the poetics of underground, of subterranean spaces, of soil, of matter to some degree, and just trying to get my head around like what this has meant to people over time. So the fact that and just like a couple of examples of like what I mean, like, why do we bury our dead? I mean, I understand that there are practical reasons for that, but like it clearly means something to us more than just the practical thing, right? We take it pretty seriously. And then what is up with all these? There's stories about people. Well, why is hell underground, right? Why, maybe it really is, right? And I'm not saying it's not, but like clearly there's something that we keep metaphorically putting stuff down there, right? And then it's also sort of a mysterious place, like it's not just dirt, quote unquote dirt. I mean, there's not only are there 1,000 varieties of dirt, but there's crystals and there's caves and there's creatures sometimes that live down there. There's all kinds of that stuff. But then there's all these myths about the hollow earth, which I don't personally think is true, but it's interesting that it keeps popping up. So I was trying to get my head around what all of this was like saying, right? What was this whole part of the human story? And then I realized like most of it doesn't actually fit in the narrative of this book, right? But I find it fascinating. So I think initially what I was trying to do was create, I was trying to find a place to put all of this stuff initially. But then kind of what I realized was I could sort of externalize a lot of the stuff that Jim was going to be figuring out about his experience sort of post the experience. Like, I guess, in one sense, he's written this after the events of the book, sort of. And I realized I could like externalize all of this sort of what could be internal thought that he might be having about trying to figure out and parse out his experience. So it's kind of ultimately doing that. And then also I just thought, I mean, on top of that, and then the book itself becoming this plot device within the book became fascinating to me. And I thought, well, especially as me being a writer, what it would do to you to like see a book that you might write actually in existence? Like, how might that sort of rewire your motivational structures, your psychology? Might it freak you out? Might it inspire you? Whatever. I thought that was cool and interesting. Plus, it starts to make the metaphysics of this story even. It was a way of showing how complicated the sort of hidden metaphysics of this story actually are.
Well, and there is the kind of like symbolic psychology of the earth, right? Like the earth is mother. Mm-hmm. And yet also in this narrative, there is, whether you want to call it like an egregore or some sort of spiritual spider at the center of this web, who in a bizarre way is sort of matriarchal, right? It's like a shade of the devouring mother. And obviously there's much more than this, but it does sort of remind me of, Coraline, right? The idea of this sort of descent into, sort of an alternate vision of the possible. Obviously there are, many differences between the two, but that is a very old human story, right? The idea of, sort of descending into the other world, or the underworld rather, where things are not as they seem. And I'll let you respond to that, because obviously the spider is both a motif and a character in this book. Right. It's very, very fascinating. But obviously they continually exit from the sewers over and over again and are presented with sort of a new vista, right? A new world, some of which are sort of shades of the possible, some of which are incredibly surreal. And I think the second one, and forgive me if I get this out of order, right, but is this sort of, semi post-apocalyptic version of Detroit?
Yes.
Like this sort of, riot running rampant. And what's interesting, I think this is a turn for both the character and for us as our understanding of what's happening, is that, the party is sort of set upon and beaten. Jim runs, which is an interesting character development. And in his flight, he not only wounds himself, right? A wound that he will carry with him through most of this book, but also he, again, goes back to his home, and his, seemingly his wife and children are there. But one of his neighbors, basically says, scares him off with a shotgun, says like, "Hey, don't come back. I buried Jim years ago." Right. Again, showing us as the audience, right, that, okay, we are seeing kind of different dimensions, sounds stupid, but different realities. So I realize I took you slightly away from where I wanted to go with this, but can you talk a little bit about the spider, right, at the center of this kind of network?
Yeah. It's interesting when you get, I mean, for anybody who's listening to this, who's written a piece of like speculative fiction that has sort of cosmological implications, right? Like there's I don't think our world actually works the way that the world works in the Earthen Dark, right? But in order to kind of get yourself to that point, you kind of have to halfway believe it, just in order to figure your way through all of the implications. Kind of what it kind of comes down to me, and it's a little difficult to articulate probably any more clearly than it comes across in the book, but I think I started piecing together like a bunch of different things, mythological. Some of them are just sort of jokes about America, right? I'm very interested in this idea that there is some weird thing at the heart of America that, and I'm not the first person to say this, right? I mean, this is kind of what Lovecraft's work is about. This is kind of what David Lynch's work is about. This is what some of William S. Burroughs' work is about, and a bunch of other writers. I'm not sort of coming up with this by myself, that there's something weird here that's operating on some other plane. Maybe it's demonic, I don't know. Those words are so loaded that, you're not sure if they apply necessarily. So I got really like thinking about that quite a lot, and then trying to figure out like, well, what would the nature, what is the, like, if you really could like look, if that's a thing and you could look directly at it, what would it be? And I like the spider for that, for a bunch of reasons. One is it fits into a bunch of North and South American native belief structures in an interesting way. Like it's not quite benevolent or malevolent. It's sort of shape shifts in that context, depending on when the story is told and who's telling it. But it's never quite clear. It's never quite all positive or quite all negative. So it's in this sort of medium space where I think they were trying to figure out what this thing meant. And then, to me, there's also, I don't know if this gives away too much, but there's something fundamentally algorithmic about the way that a spider works. So the way that they construct a web, they don't construct a bunch of different kinds of webs. They have one web that's a very specific thing that is apparently programmed deep down in their DNA, right? They don't learn how to, the mother spider doesn't teach their young how to make this web. It just seems to know how to do it, but it's in a very almost mechanical, it kind of, to me, the more I thought about it, kind of creepy way that it just has this like software program running in its brain to make this thing, right? And it's a trap fundamentally. So expanding that fundamental thing that kind of creeps me out about spiders, and I'm not particularly arachnophobic or anything. It's just sort of philosophically it creeps me out. Expanding that to try and think about, well, what to me is this weird thing about America that we keep, I still don't know that I totally understand it necessarily, but there is something we do here that's eerily algorithmic and programmatic that we don't think we really understand. And I think like I guess the spider there is sort of a metaphor for all of that. And it shows up, I mean, in the book, it shows up in other places too, because I think like the forces that get Jim canceled, I think those are like a weird, perverse, algorithmic thing run amok as well, right? So it's not just this like speculative, fun thing I came up with. I'm trying to like almost make an analogy for what I think is weird about, like deep down weird about America. I feel like I was rambling there. Sorry.
Oh no, not at all. And obviously, we see this kind of, repeated motif of like the spider or the web. And in fact, one of these sort of alternate realities that, Jim finds himself in is just a mess of, ropes and lines, like sort of a spider's web. Right. And it's kind of interesting, again, the algorithmic element, because different characters react to this situation very differently. And, there is at least a level to which, Jim and others are trying to figure it out, or trying to kind of suss out the internal logic, of this sort of trap that they're in. There's another topside excursion, and it bears repeating that throughout this whole situation, Jim is seriously wounded. And obviously having an open wound in a sewer is not good for you. Right. To be blunt, he's going through suffering. And in one of these instantiations, they sort of go up into kind of a Bronze Age version of Detroit.
Right.
And, Jim comes out, right. He's able to kind of, barter for clothes, and he returns to his wife, right. His wife speaking in an accent he doesn't quite understand, but his daughter, who is another one, I think probably without a lot of screen time, one of the best parts of this book. You've written her very, very well. It's very endearing.
Good.
But in this section, his daughter has been effectively selected as sort of like a Vestal Virgin, a sacrificial, I guess, pawn in a religious rite where she will be. How would you say? Trepanned, will have a hole drilled in her head. I'm not sure what the correct form of that would be.
You said it right. Yeah, I think you said it right.
Forced to undergo trepanation. We'll
sure.
use
there
the
you go.
version. And there are several things interesting about that. And, again, we're sort of watching this transformation of, Jim from sort of a low to high agency, or kind of this, cowardly to courageous figure. And as they go up to this temple, right, to save his sort of alternate daughter, there is a part of this ritual which is only known to women. His wife has done that part. And there's a definite moment where there is a word, and, his wife tells him, like, there's a word that the men know, I don't. And if you don't say it, it's done.
Right.
And he fails. He freezes up, he pauses and effectively runs back into the sewer, right? To kind of find an alternate world again. And so I think it's really interesting that this, these sort of alternate realities give sort of Jim a chance to sort of go through similar motions in a different context. But also, I think it's a really interesting moment because it's a very definite, and again, we've seen this before, when his friends were being beaten, he ran, where Jim fails to act, he freezes. And I'm curious, can you speak to that sort of evolution? Obviously, we have the before and after. We know that this is an arc, but kind of that process of him developing throughout the novel.
Yeah, I mean, and on one level, it's sort of classic, sort of hero's journey kind of stuff, right? I mean, the fundamental aspect of like the modern adventure, and I'm using modern very broadly, adventure story is a character who undergoes this transformation and they become like a better version of themselves in some way. And so, it's that if you're a writer out there and you're sort of thinking about how you're going to put this book together and you want your character to change, and, it's sort of trite to say that, that's all stories are about a character changing. Well, that's sort of easy to say, but that change doesn't happen instantaneously. Like, I like to think that I've become a better person and a better man over, my years of adulthood. I definitely am a much better person than I was when I was 20. I don't think I was a bad person necessarily, but there's a lot of stuff I hadn't figured out about myself and about the world and about responsibility and about, a whole bunch of other things. And that process for me was slow, and it was one of sometimes being forced to grow very, very fast in some dimension, forced to just confront with like, yeah, I screwed that up in a very, very serious way. And I either got to suck it up and like adapt to that or just let it crush me, So it was trying to think about like, turn what are, I think, very real things that all men go through on the process of like becoming what they could be, and trying to turn those into something that lays on sort of an adventure story, like something with like very high exaggerated stakes and that sort of thing. So yeah, that moment of him not having the word he's supposed to have relates to something that I have felt a couple times in my life, where it's sort of like, man, it feels like everybody knows what they're supposed to do in this situation except for me. Like, was there a manual that I didn't get that everybody else, seemed, and that's like the self-pitying way to go, is like, oh, well, everybody else has got something I don't, blah, 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 blah. But all that is to say, I've definitely had those moments where I felt like I've felt that feeling where like, oh, it seems like everybody else already figured this out except for me. And now I have to kind of go about this the hard way. And so, yeah, I was just trying to find a way to get that aspect of development that I think applies to most people and narrativize that, dramatize that, make that interesting. But there's other stuff going on in that scene as well. But in terms of Jim's development, that's kind of what I was trying to find. I was trying to find a real, I was going to say real world. It's definitely not real world. I was trying to find an in-world correlative to that internal process, fundamentally.
So you mentioned there's other stuff you're trying to accomplish with that scene, right?
Yeah.
What else are you trying to get at there?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's I suppose a bunch of things. I mean, in that scene, in that whole chapter, there's implications about what's been different historically there. And you do see people, there's essentially like a volcano cult is basically what he's dealing with. And I mean, this sort of ties into this broader metaphorical system that I'm dealing with here about the earth and what does the earth mean? What is it? How does it relate to how humans view the cosmos, view themselves? And sometimes I think when you're really trying to like kind of crack some mystery about human beings and how we are, it's interesting to take like an extreme or like steer it off in a different direction and look how it develops differently. And that can sometimes reveal the gap between how things are for us here in 2026 in America. We're both in America and we're both have our, you and I have had different upbringings and stuff, but our upbringings and whatnot are a lot more similar than if we compare ourselves to somebody in Malaysia, right? But I think when we examine that gap, we can sometimes get a clear sense of like what are the factors that actually developed to us sort of being who we are as individuals and as societies. So trying to kind of like push things out in ways that I think are interesting and emotionally evocative and, maybe ring some bells to sort of try to get a look at those kinds of things. Yeah.
So there's close to the end of the book, there's a really interesting instance, and you mentioned it earlier when talking about the watch, where Jim basically is provided the opportunity to, with his newly discovered agency, right a wrong, right? To go back to the day where his life was upended.
Yeah.
And effectively, he steals into his house, finds himself, and lays down the law. Basically says, like, here's what you're going to do. And here's, how you're going to go through it. And in a worse novel, that would be the end of it. Right. He goes back and creates this sort of splinter reality where all is well. He, is able to go back and fix himself. But that's not what happens. And I think that this is a really interesting point in the novel thematically, and also just from a pure narrative perspective. You built up enough trust at this point that I wasn't quite worried you were going to land there. But there was a part of me where I was like, "All right, come on, like let's not fumble this at the end zone."
Right, and then we're just going to have like a rising score, and all of his friends are going to clap.
Yeah, and then everyone clapped. Right.
Yeah.
As Reddit tells us.
Yeah.
But so I want, if you could you explain what's going on there? Why doesn't it end there? Right.
Yeah. Well, I think it doesn't end there partially because, it's a good question. Why doesn't it end there? Well, I think part of it is, I think part of this relates to sort of my view of how things work in life. And that is, and this is maybe the way I'm going to say this is going to sound more cynical than I intend it. Nothing ever is over. Like it's never real. Like I don't think it's like over until you're in the grave. I was going to say in the grave, and then even not, because it's the people you leave behind, the situations you leave behind, and all that. It's sort of never. Yeah, there's always like one more turn of the screw, kind of, right? And generally in my life, all victories have come with having to sort of give something up. There's always been this aspect where like, well, this opportunity has happened, this doorway has opened up, so this other one has to be closed. And if I try to bring, and also that you don't necessarily get to bring, if a new sort of door opens up or a new opportunity presents itself, you don't always get to bring everything with you. Like, you do perhaps have to become a different person to live on the other side of that barrier. And that's not, I think that process of like becoming in a positive way a different person, I think that often gets painted as this like really, I don't want to say people would necessarily paint it as easy, but a fairly straightforward process where it's like, well, if you just eat right and you get up on time and you stop doing this.
Is that a shade of a Jordan Peterson impersonation there? You're kind of dipping into Kermit.
It might be. I've got a lot of Jordan Peterson in my head, to be honest, probably too much. But you know what I mean? Like, it's like you can't. There's there's always it's always more complicated, I guess. All this stuff about how people develop psychologically and grow and become better people. And we can become better people, but it's a messy process. And occasionally it's painful, and occasionally actual sacrifices have to be made to like become that better thing, right? And that's often the reason why we don't do them. We kind of know, like Jim he's spineless, but not for zero reasons, right? He got kind of comfortable in his position. He doesn't want to rock the boat because, who does want to rock the boat really, unless they have to? And so, all of this is the situation he finds himself in is an accumulation of small decisions in the wrong direction that he made. And so the process of trying to steer that ship back, you're going to bump into a lot of stuff on the way, I guess.
Well, and additionally, it's sort of, an exploration of that, that motif of like the arguments you have in the shower after the fact, right? Where it's like, oh, it would have been great if I said this. And, of course, everyone knows that that's sort of a vain hope, right?
It is.
But you get to see the character who's been stewing on that for, months. The time is bizarre in this intentionally. So a long time, gets to go back and see that, oh, wait, no, this wouldn't have magically changed everything if you had the perfect retort.
Right. Well, that's the thing. I don't know about you. I've only really told somebody off a few times in my life, and it's not like it's just over after that. It's not like the credits just roll after that. Like the one time that comes to mind immediately, I had to work with that person the next day. So it was probably good in the long run, but it just opened up a whole nother set of awkwardnesses and stuff that had to be dealt with. Right. It's not when,
Well, and there's sort of an interesting echo to that. And we have not mentioned much about the party that Jim finds himself with, which is, a lot of the meat of the book. There's a lot going on there. Look, man, it's an hour-long podcast. Read the book.
Yeah.
Yes, but the character of the captain is quite interesting. And for two reasons. One, he has both a complicated relationship with his father. One of the things he constantly, refers to this refrain of when men were men, the men who built the sewers were different than us. And he talks about his father. And he himself is this sort of, estranged relationship to his sons. He says, my sons basically look at me like a combination between a Confederate statue and a piggy bank, it being this both racist and, source of money. But at roughly this similar time in the book, fuzzy on details, but he meets his own father in a bar. Right. He recounts, sort of going back in time, what he wanted.
Yeah. Oh, this is another, that's actually another character, but yes.
Oh, shoot. My bad.
That's okay. That's okay. I just don't want to start making connections that aren't there, but yeah, but fathers are definitely a theme here for sure. Yeah.
Well, and when there is this meeting between a character who is not the character I thought it was, and his father in, this sort of dingy bar. It's very interesting, interaction. So if you could you explain that a little bit? Just what happens there?
Yeah. So as they're trying to get out of this labyrinth, initially they kind of do things sort of as a team, but over time it gets diffused, and their fates. There's four guys down in this river. Their fates start to get go off in sort of different directions. And one of the characters, a guy named Ray, who sort of has his own arc, he finds himself in a sort of time and place where he realizes if he just walks down the block, he might maybe be able to see his father, who he never really knew particularly well because his father was a raging alcoholic and died when this character was pretty young. And so he goes into the bar and he sees him. He sees his dad when, this character, Ray, goes in. He would have been 8 years old or something at this time. He goes in and he sees his father, and he tries to have this heartfelt connection, or at least that's how he describes it. And his father does not react to it particularly well. And his father actually tries to kill him because it's just some strange weird dude, frankly, getting kind of gay with him. That's kind of how his father sees it. I don't know if you want something more there. I mean, that's fundamentally what happens. I think for me, it got me. This book did sort of thematically become about fathers in a certain way, mostly because it's, you know, for men, and the father-son relationship is a couple of them are fathers, and that father-son relationship is always sort of interesting to me, partially for biographical reasons, to be honest. But you know, there's this sort of tearful reunion where everything is now fine. Sometimes it works in real life, I suppose, but I guess wanted to like not allow that to happen, if that makes sense. Because again, I'm trying to create these sort of layers of claustrophobia, right? Where it's like, yeah, claustrophobia physically, but psychologically and intellectually and ultimately like cosmological claustrophobia. And in that interaction with him and his father, I mean, this character, I think partially what he realizes is like, there is no way to actually escape his life. There's only the knot for him in particular. The knot can only really get tighter, and any attempt to like fix it or something doesn't seem like it's going to work, or at least he doesn't see how it could work. The kind of the knots only, it's one of those knots, like the more you try to untie it, it just gets tighter and tighter and tighter. I think that's how he begins. Maybe he always saw his life, but he certainly sees it that way at that point.
So we have successfully gotten almost to time without really telling anyone what happens in this book.
Okay. Yeah. We picked
I consider a success.
I think. Yeah. No, it's good. Yeah.
But the ending, and I won't really get any of the details to it, but there's a couple, interesting parts, right? One, Jim starts the book. Right? He actually, once things are as back to normal as they'll get. But also, he is carried. This is sort of another recurring item throughout the whole book, right? The gun. One of the men has a gun. Jim's given it. Initially, he's of course, very hesitant. He doesn't like it. He doesn't know how to use it.
Right.
But when he's back, there's sort of this interesting moment where he's back home. He can see his wife and daughter again. He started on this book. But he sees in the distance another version of him sort of coming. And he reaches into the desk and grabs the gun. So there are a couple implications of that, right? One, there are more of him running around. He's been to other realities and, seen himself or seen the memory of himself at the very least. Which, one, brings up the question of, has he really escaped, right? And also, we see this kind of like final culmination of this agency, right? Like, I will not let this be taken away from me. So I think that's a very poignant note to end on for a couple different reasons.
Yeah, I think so. I hope so. I liked it when I came up with it. I was pretty stoked. I'll tell you that.
Well, fair enough, man.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up on time. Is there anything you want to say before we go to plugs?
No, I mean, I don't think so. For people who, it's so true. I really appreciate, this is the most in-depth conversation I've had about the book. And so I really, really do appreciate that. I mean, I think for people who haven't encountered it, it's difficult. And this isn't me trying to just sort of puff myself up. I think it is a difficult book to like get a grasp of like what the heck it is. The cover is like intentionally super pulpy. We made it so it looks like something out of the 70s that you would get off the dime store rack. That was like on purpose. Some of the aspects of it, the story, are quite pulpy, but I think if that sort of thing appeals to you, you'll probably like it. And I think if something a little bit more, I don't know what word to use, a little bit more literary appeals to you, I think you'll find that there as well. So yeah, I guess if you like pulpy adventure stories, listen to that part of the promo, and if you like psychological, cerebral, literary stuff, listen to that part of the promo. I think both of those audiences will find something that's fun in there.
Well, and also, listeners, you're used to my book reviews, right? When I bring a guy on, I very deliberately don't tell you too much, right? There's a lot that we didn't get into, like really quite a bit. So there is more to, pull at and pick at and discover. Like you can listen to this whole thing and, you may have certain things spoiled as much as spoilers matter for adults, but
yeah,
there's a lot of meat on that bone. Buy this book. It's quite good. As you'll find out, Brad, once I've read a book, I'll be citing it for months. It'll come up again, but I like this book quite a bit. You should listen to it. And then obviously, Brad's work elsewhere is worth your time. Both of those will be linked. Obviously, other than, the book and your podcast, where can people find you, man?
Yeah, I'm probably most active on Twitter. That's just Brad Kelly, 1 E in Kelly. I got on there early, and so I got like my name, which is kind of cool. And then I'm also pretty active on Substack, bradkelly-esque. .substack.com. Podcasts you can find wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can just go to the website madmethodpod.com. I'm pretty easy. I'm pretty easy to track down. So check out Method Madness. I drop in episodes every week, so there's constantly something coming at you. And if you don't like this week's episode, just wait a week.
Well, sure thing, man. Obviously, that will all be down in the description. As far as my stuff, The Jay Burden Show, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you want to listen to podcasts. This is what I do now. I am, as I so eloquently said earlier, a professional internet person. If you want to support me, you get the episodes early and ad-free. It's really not half bad, the price. I think it comes out to 19 cents an hour, right, on the premium feed. No ads is also a benefit, but I can't thank you guys enough, right? This is how I support myself, so your support means the world. Also, check out our sponsor, Axios Remote Fitness Coaching. I normally say I use their product 4 or 5 days a week, which is true, but we have like 8 inches of ice here and it's the South. And so life has just screeched to a halt. So I haven't been using JD's product, but I will when I can actually drive again. But Brad, thanks. This was a ton of fun, man.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it. It's good to meet you.
To everyone at home, keep your head up. Life can't last forever. Good night.